千里之行，始于足下. A journey of 1,000 miles begins beneath the feet. We now gather in the Tao to travel the journey together. Welcome to Tao Talks with Derek Lin, where we delve deeply into the Daodejing by Lao Tzu. Daodejing, chapter 43. Let's talk about this. What does 43 say? Well, it's a relatively short chapter, but it's very meaningful. As you will see for yourself, it's one of the chapters in the Daodejing that talks about the soft overcoming the hard. It's going to start with the formless nature of the Tao, and then it will extrapolate from that to human actions, to the way to live as a Tao cultivator. So here's what it looks like. Short chapter, only 8 lines. And it says, the softest things of the world override the hardest things of the world. That which has no substance enters into that which has no openings. From this, I know the benefits of unattached actions, the teaching without words. The benefits of actions without attachment are rarely matched in the world. So it comes across as very short, very concise in the original Chinese, ancient Chinese, as well as in modern English. So as usual, let us subject this to a sectional analysis. Let's take a look to see if we can find the repeating characters. So right off the bat, there are several repeating characters from line 1 to line 2. I see 4 characters that are repeating. Can you also see them? And I'll just go ahead and highlight 3 of them so you can use that as a guide. 天下之. So that is definitely repeating from line 1 to line 2, as you can see. And then the character following that, meaning most, is also repeating. And then line 1 ends with a character for soft. Line 2 ends with a character for hard. So the last 2 characters will be, in line 1, will be most soft or softest. And the last 2 characters in line 2 will be, quote unquote, most hard or hardest. Anyhow, we think that we can, based on this, we can see that this is a poetic structure, a couplet, 2 lines. They're not exactly the same length, but there is enough of a repeating structure to see that they are 2 lines that belong together. So what about line 3 and line 4? Any repeating characters there? Well, I think it's easy to see that the first character of line 3 is the same character as the middle one in line 4. As you can see. So at this point, we could just group 1 and 2 together, and then we can group 3 and 4 together. But then looking at the overall meaning, it seems like, from line 1 all the way down to line 4 is a complete thought. And the thought, on the one hand, is that about soft overcoming the hard, and on the other is about that which is lacking substance goes into that which has no openings. And that those 2 lines may seem a little confusing, but we're gonna talk about them quite extensively. For now, though, we can basically mark 1 to 4 as a section by itself. Generally speaking, with ancient Chinese poetry, usually it goes in twos. The couplets are combined together, and if you have a verse with 8 lines, chances are excellent that you can divide it into 2 halves of 4 lines each, and the 4 lines can be divided into 2 sets of 2. And that is the case here. So let's continue on. From line 5 onward, looking at line 5 and line 6, I don't really see any repeating characters except one. The next to last character in line 6 is repeated in line 5, but then if I scan further down, I actually see additional repeating characters looking like this. So slightly different expressions, but the characters are definitely repeating, and I can say that all the characters in line 7 appear in line 5, but then there's an extra character in the next to last character in line 5. But this is enough to establish that indeed we have line 5 to line 8 as another section. And that means in the sectional analysis for 43, we're dividing this up into 2 halves. Line 1 to line 4 being the first half, line 5 to line 8 being the second half. Having seen that, we are now ready to do the line-by-line analysis. And in some cases, we'll go character by character for the characters that are interesting and worthy of note. We're going to start with line 1. In line 1, we will begin with the first 2 characters, 天下. And here's opinion on that. The opinion looks a little confusing. It sounds like 天下, as you can see here. What does it mean? And you can see that 天下, these 2 characters appear in line 1 and also in line 2. So there's significance there. Literally, the first character means heaven or sky, and the second character means below or beneath. When you put them together, heaven below, sky beneath, sky under, etc., the meaning that you can discern is that this is talking about everything under the sky, all below heaven. In other words, the entire world. So when we talk about 天下, meaning everything under the sky, I want to make sure that you know the difference between this term, 天下, and the other term that we have recently covered, 万物, the 10,000 things or the myriad things. What is the difference? Isn't 万物, the myriad things, also everything? And 天下, you're talking about everything under the sky. So everything is everything, right? What is the difference? Well, the difference is important. 天下, talking about the world, is the setting, the world in which we live. 万物, the myriad things, are the living things in it. So if you think of the setting as like a stage, then 万物, the living things in it, would be like actors on a stage, just to use the analogy. 天下, by the way, is a simple and common term in Mandarin. 天下 is still widely used today in everyday speech. It's one of those terms that haven't changed in thousands of years of language evolution. It's written the same way that it was, thousands of years ago, and it has the exact same meaning that it did thousands of years ago. This is one of those unchanging terminology that has survived the ages. 天下. And it's pretty simple, so I figure you guys would enjoy hearing about this. Now, let's move to common everyday term like 天下 in Mandarin to a term that is much more specialized, a term that is not used in everyday Mandarin, but has special Dao meaning. And this is where we move to the end of line 1 to look at these two characters. 至柔. So the pinyin is going to look a little confusing as well. And part of the reason is because 至, the first character, is tricky, difficult for a native English speaker to pronounce correctly. 至, there's not an exact equivalent in English. So the best I can do is the DZI that you see here. 柔, meaning soft, will be easier. And it's not rao, as one may assume looking at the pinyin. It's 柔. Together, 至柔. What does it mean? So two characters. The first one meaning most, and the second one meaning soft. So together, softest. So in English language, the closest term will be softest. Now, keep in mind, this is specialized terminology in the Tao. So when it talks about softest, it's got multiple layers of meaning. It's not talking about tissue paper. It's not talking about things that freshly washed laundry, anything like that. It's about things out in nature, things in the world that could be accorded this characteristic of being the softest. Most teachers in the Tao tradition explaining this term would go to water, like as their only example. And so many books, whether it's commentary, translation, or interpretation, will go just one level deep and point to water as the softest thing and say that, well, this line is referring to water. And then later on, when it's talking about the hardest things, such books will often talk about how if you look at rocks, stones, and water over time is going to wear them down. So water overcomes the hardest rocks and stones. That's one level deep. The reality of Tao teachings is that it goes many more levels beyond that. And what I would like to do today is to show everyone how we can go really deep into it to a point where it's actually extremely practical in daily life. So to say the softest thing is water, it isn't wrong, but it's just the tip of the iceberg. There's a huge amount of discussion to be had just on this concept of softest, the softest thing. So let's start with water and then build from there. So at the top of the slide, 至柔. Same thing as before, we begin with water. So we know water is formless. It's liquid. It doesn't have defined shape like solid objects. It takes whatever form that its container gives it. If the container is a bottle, water takes the form of the bottle. If the container is a cup, water takes the form of a cup. It's formless by itself. Now, this is a fitting metaphor for the Tao. We oftentimes compare water to the Tao. We even talk about the 7 virtues of water. There are many virtues. So just to take a few of those positive attributes that water has and then compare that to the Tao, we can see why it's a fitting metaphor. Water goes everywhere, seeps into everything. There's a chapter specifically to talk about that, about how flooding water goes left and right, goes everywhere. This is a reflection of the omnipresence of the Tao, meaning that the Tao is also everywhere. The Tao is in everything. Whatever it is that is all pervasive, in reality, that's the Tao. So water is a metaphor for that. Point number 1. Point number 2, water is nurturing. Water quenches the thirst of animals and plants alike. It doesn't make any distinction as to who may be deserving and who may be less deserving. This is a reflection of the life-giving nature of the Tao. The Tao is whatever pushes the life force, that whatever drives life forward, whatever drives the process of evolution forward in time, that's the Tao. That's the name that we give whatever that is. That's driving all life forms. And Tao provides the environment where life can thrive. So we look around in our world, we have gravity, we have sunlight, we have water and air, we have the means to seek sustenance. So all of these are provided for by the Tao so that living things such as ourselves, human beings, can survive and thrive. Furthermore, water naturally flows to the lowest places. Water has no need to be seen, to be highly visible by other people. This reflects the virtue of humility in the Tao. So once again, another good representative of the nature of the Tao. And then finally, water doesn't fight anyone. Water contends against nothing and no one. And yet, it is imaginably, amazingly, incredibly powerful. The largest and heaviest vessels that we can build, if you think about those giant cruise ships, and even larger vessels than that, the super tankers of the world, aircraft carriers, and so on, no matter how big and how heavy they are, easily lifted by water. And the graphic that I have here is just, it's an infographic about size comparisons where the silhouette, the black silhouette is a super tanker, and it's compared against other man-made objects at the top graphic, the pyramid, Statue of Liberty, the Leaning Tower, etc. And then it's compared with the largest animals, which may be large in themselves, but cannot compare to the size of the supertanker. And then at the bottom, compared to other forms of transportation, there's the Titanic. And then you will also see the airplane, which we think of as being very big, but it's actually rather small compared to the supertanker, and same with the truck in the middle. So no matter, here's the bottom line, no matter how big the man-made vessel may be, it is an ocean-going vessel. It's going to sail around the world. It's going to float on water quite easily and get to wherever it wants to go. So that is the power of the ocean. That's the power of water. And there's another way that water bears upon the Tao in our cultivation. And this is something that actually I decided to talk about first. When I published my first book collection of stories, the Tao of Daily Life, I could think of no better way to discuss the Tao than to begin with a story called Fish in the Ocean. And I know that some of you have already read the book. You are familiar with the story. For those of you who have not, I would like to give you a quick introduction. So once upon a time, there was a young fish living in the ocean who had some questions. He went to an old fish, and then he asked, everybody is talking about this thing that I hear all the time. They talk about ocean this, ocean that. What is the ocean? The older and wiser fish responded, said to the younger fish, well, you see, the ocean is what surrounds you on all sides. It's all around you right now. And this puzzled the young fish. The young fish said, looking around, there's nothing surrounding me. So what are you talking about? What do you mean? There's nothing around me. If the ocean surrounds me on all sides, why can I not see it? And the old fish was patient and said that, well, you cannot see it because the ocean is inside of you and outside of you. When you move around, when you swim, it is moving, swimming with you. When you stop, the ocean is stopping with you. No matter what you do, it's doing the exact same thing with you. You were born in the ocean, and you're probably going to die in the ocean. So it's wrapping itself around you, just like your own skin, or scale in this case. The young fish says, how can I tell it exists if I cannot see it? And the old fish advises, well, you have to use not just your eyes, you have to feel it. You may not be able to see it, but you can sense it. You have to trust your feelings. Feelings are the key. So that's where I ended the story about the fish in the ocean. And I actually wanted to pay homage to Star Wars, trust your feelings, young Skywalker. The point is, this story could have been told in a different way by just straight up talking about the Tao. So I could say that, well, what is this thing called Tao? What are people talking about? What exactly is it? And then an older sage speaking to a younger disciple would explain that the Tao is that which surrounds you on all sides. And the disciple may say, well, what are you talking about? I don't see anything around me. And the sage would explain, well, you see, the Tao is inside of you, it's outside of you. It moves with you, it stops with you. You were born in the Tao. As you die, you will return to the Tao. So it's wrapping itself around you. And then the disciple might say, well, how can I tell that the Tao exists if I cannot see it? And upon which point the sage would say, trust your feelings. So we could say it that way, but I really like the ancient Chinese way. This is sort of the ancient Chinese version of Finding Nemo, right? So I like their way to indirectly point out that fish forget they live in the ocean, just as we forget that we live in the Tao. And this is specifically Confucius who pointed this out. He said that we live in the Tao, but we're not aware of the Tao, just like fish living in water, but unaware of water. And this is the graphic again that you saw. And as we said, water is inside and outside the fish. Water is with the fish throughout its entire life cycle. for the vast majority of fish throughout history, most of them live and die in the ocean, without being caught by humans. Therefore, it can easily be taken for granted. We can swap in ourselves for the role of the fish, and then say Tao instead of water, and this sentence will make complete sense. Tao is inside and outside of human beings. The Tao is with us throughout our entire life cycle. We were born in the Tao, we die and return to the Tao. Therefore, we can easily take the Tao for granted. So that's the connection, a strong connection between water and the Tao. And then anyone who would like to get more into this and additional explanations on the topic can take a look at chapter 1 of the Tao of Daily Life. And just to make sure we're clear, the story about fish in the ocean, that is just adapted from the original idea. Confucius did not tell the story that way. It was yours truly that decided to tell the story in that particular way. So now, a quick question to everyone. We've talked about water as the softest. So the question is, what else can we point to as 至柔, the softest things in the world? So let me pause for a moment for everyone to put some thought to that. Okay, I see a very good guess, an accurate guess, air. So we can think of it this way. For the fish, there's water surrounding them. For us human beings, well, we're not fish, we're not living in the ocean, but there's definitely air all around us. So air for human beings will be similar to water for fish. And that is why if I am next to someone and I think there's nothing between the two of us, that's not technically correct because there's air. There's oxygen, nitrogen, between the two of us. So it isn't nothing. Air is present. It's just that we take air for granted. Now, although we take air for granted, like the fish in the story take water for granted, but just like water for fish, we cannot survive without air. We have a constant need for air, just as fish have constant need for water. Now, fish may prefer fresh water. We human beings prefer fresh air. So not just any air, high quality air. Air can be stale, just as water can be stagnant. So then how do we link this to the Tao? If water can be compared to the Tao, can we do the same with air? And the answer is, well, of course. What we're talking about here, our preference for fresh air, it corresponds to the Tao, to the Tao teachings that we study. If you think about learning the Tao as being a natural thing, just like breathing, taking in some air, then you would want fresh air like you would want fresh insights from the Tao. We want specifically insights and ideas that are current, relevant, keeping up with the times. Stale air, like stale ideas, in this case, stale teachings will be the ones that remain stuck in the past, that are no longer relevant today. So definitely there is a connection between air as the softest thing and a connection between that and the Tao itself as well. Air is everywhere. Tao is everywhere. We need air to survive. We need Tao even though we take it for granted, and so on. Okay, comparing air with water. Water is something that you can scoop up and hold in your hands. Air, not so much, because it is in the gaseous state. It's not liquid. So air seems to be even more formless than water. So we've gone yet another level beyond the formlessness of water to the formlessness of air. What would be the next level beyond that? And have the ancient sages talked about it? Did they talk about the vacuum of outer space? No, they did not. They didn't have any knowledge about outer space. They just know about the earth, the world in which we live. But there is actually another thing that they talked about, not as well known as the example of water, but nevertheless, it exists in ancient Tao literature, and that is light. So here, I want to talk about Huangdi. This is the young scholar who unified the various versions of the Daodejing about 1800 years ago. So the most prevalent version of the Daodejing that's been studied in the various dynasties since the time of Lao Tzu, most of that is the Huangdi edition. He was a young scholar. He was known as a prodigy. In his commentary about the Daodejing, as he was putting all these different versions together, he talked about light, moonlight is what he had in mind. That could also be 至柔, the softest. And it's interesting. Let's bring in some light. So think about light. We've talked about how air is even more of a formless thing than water. Water, at least we can see. Air, we can't really see it. Light, well, it's even more formless than water or air. Air, at least it's a thing. It's something, just in gaseous form. Light, well, can you bottle light? Can you weigh? Can you weigh how much the photons actually weigh? Well, it's massless. It doesn't weigh anything. So the light, when it shines, it is everywhere, either by direct illumination or by reflection. So Huangdi, this ancient scholar from 1800 years ago, one night, he's noticing how the moonlight is flooding the landscape. And he's realizing that even what we think of as darkness, there's actually a little bit of light. So light is always present. During the day, of course, there's sunlight. So there's illumination everywhere from the sun. At night, we have the moon and the stars. The moon may be new moon, not visible, but the stars are always there. So there's always a little bit of light, even in the darkness of nights. It's always present. And just like water, just like air, light is something that we may take for granted. We may even forget about light, just like the Tao, because we've always had it. So this is yet another level further than water or air. Water, air, light. Now, we can push it one more level. Would anyone care to guess what that is? Every level that we go is more formless, less of a thing. We're already at light. The level beyond that will be thoughts. And here's the thinker. Iconic image. So thoughts, we all know that we have thoughts, but what are they? Well, the true answer is that we know it to some extent, but not really. We know that physically, thoughts are electrochemical reactions generated by neurons. But if we're talking about human thoughts, the conversation gets much more tricky. Human thoughts, we can tell, is different. It's at a level beyond what we can observe in the animal kingdom. Human level intelligence seems to be something very special. It allows us to basically dominate the entire world. Human beings, conquering nature, so to speak. Now, electrochemical reactions generated by neurons can be found in all kinds of living creatures, but they don't possess human level consciousness or human level intelligence. So we don't quite know what makes our electrochemical reactions so much more special. We can tell from a non-physical sense, thoughts are the primary feature of human consciousness, which seems to be an emergent property of neural activities. So it's patterns of information. We can talk about it in that way. We don't fully understand human consciousness. It's still a great mystery. We can then go into metaphysical discussions about the soul, and that doesn't really get us too far. So mystics will talk about human consciousness, human intelligence as being part of a universal intelligence. Perhaps they are right. From the Tao perspective, we can talk about our thoughts as being aligned with the Tao, congruent with the Tao. Specifically, thoughts are most Tao-like when they fit the following description: creative, inventive, innovative. This is because, as we have talked about in chapter 42, the Tao is about never-ending, continuous, universal creation. When manifesting in the human mind, partaking in the characteristic of the Tao, it means that we ourselves are engaged in our own micro, creativity-driven creation process. We are in a constant state of creation to remake our worlds, to reinvent ourselves. When you are able to do that, when you're able to be creative at your best, you are being Tao-like. There are other characteristics that makes your thoughts Tao-like. For instance, when you are compassionate, when you are kind, charitable, you are reflecting on the nurturing aspect of the Tao. That's when your thoughts are Tao-like as well. But here's another aspect: life-affirming and life-improving. So we know that all the living things out in nature, the driving force for that we would call the Tao. Applying that to human beings, whatever it is within you that motivated you to tune in to this talk right now, today, that is a whisper within you. It basically says that, I believe that I can be better. I can do more. There's still more that I can contribute in life. I haven't tapped my potentialities as of yet. I need to do more of that. That is the whisper of the Tao connected with the Tao itself that seeks to improve you so that you can live up to your full potential. When you are able to identify with that, be one with it, happiness and joy shall be yours. So far, let's backtrack and think about what we have talked about. Water, air, light, and now thoughts. There is a consistent theme in 至柔, the softest. These are all things that are commonplace, they're always around. We've always had access to water, we always have air, we always have light all around us, we always have our thoughts, sometimes too much more so. They're always around. Everybody has them. And for that reason, most people don't pay a lot of attention to them. And in case you're wondering, for those of you who are fans of science and physics, we can actually go beyond just these four, just water, air, light, and thoughts. We could actually talk about the Higgs field. Recent discoveries, 2013, the Higgs boson proved this paper that was written more than 50 years ago about the Higgs field. The Higgs field is what gives mass to particles. It's pervasive, it's everywhere, everything has mass because of Higgs field being all over the place, just like the Tao. I actually don't want to spend too much time on that because it gets into physics, which is not as easy for most people to relate to. Let's stick to all these things that are familiar to everyday life that we can all identify with. So think about these for just a moment. We're coming back to them. They will figure prominently in our discussion that's coming right up. So these are the softest things. Then it's time to go back to the Daodejing and talk about line 2. Line 1, notice that we have talked about 天下 and then 至柔, softest things in the world. Now we're about to get into line 2 with a new term, 驰騁. Now, these two characters, just like 至柔, have special meaning in the Tao. The meaning is to ride a steed in a gallop, meaning to dominate and control. So the first thing that I want everyone to notice, I have the characters pretty large in the slide. If you look at these two characters and you look at the left half of the character, you're going to see the same half appearing for both characters. That half is known as a radical in Chinese characters. The radical is the same. Both characters have this as a radical. This is looking like a sort of a expanded version of the radical to the left-hand side of each one of these two characters. That character is ma, meaning horse. So generally speaking, you can recognize and tell the meaning of Chinese characters in modern Mandarin by looking at the radical to the left or to the right to give you an idea what the possible meaning is. In this case, riding a horse, galloping with a horse. Specifically, the meaning is this: noticing how the human rider is nowhere near as powerful as a horse. It is soft compared to the hardness of the strength of the horse. But it's interesting that the rider is the one in charge. The rider controls the horse. In the same way, what we want to express here is that the softest things of the world are like the rider, that's riding a horse. The hardest things of the world are the horse being ridden. So in a similar way that we're talking about here, It always seems to be the softest things of the world that dominate and control. So water, we know, is very powerful. And there are more examples. So now, let's talk about 至坚. The last two characters of line 2 is the complement of the last two characters of line 1. So we talked about the softest things. We talked about water, air, light, and thoughts. Now we'll talk about the hardest things. So you see the opinion here, that's a reasonable approximation. And then here's the meaning. The first character here, 至, that doesn't change, means the same thing, most. And then we have the character for hard. So 至柔, the term that we talked about, has multi-layer meaning in the Tao context. This term, 至坚, same thing. It's a specific Tao terminology, so it's not used every day in modern Mandarin. You wouldn't use this term in everyday conversation to talk about 至坚. It would only make sense in a Tao-oriented discussion. It's rich with layers of meaning, layers that I would like to explore. So, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, in general, when teachers lecture about the Tao and they get to this part, they'll usually talk about stones and rocks. They'll talk about how water can drill through stones or rocks, and maybe they'll show some pictures of that. Sometimes they will also bring in the example of the tongue outlasting the teeth, that as you get old, your teeth fall out, but your tongue remains. That's what they would say. The tongue is soft, outlasting the teeth. The hard things is an indication of the soft overcoming the hard, or the soft winning over the hard. Those are the typical explanations. So my challenge in going into this particular chapter is to go beyond the usual. I want to delve much deeper into 至柔, overcoming 至坚, softest overcoming the hardest. So here we are back again with the 4, starting with water. And here, as you can see, the Grand Canyon provides a most dramatic example of water, which is the Colorado River, cutting down rocks over millions of years. It results in this magnificent scenery at the Grand Canyon National Park. So looking at the magnificence of this natural scenery, the results of water cutting down rocks over millions of years, what is the message? What is the teaching here? What can we learn from nature? Certainly, this is an example of water, the softest, overcoming the hardest, the rocks. In this process, let's observe and learn from water. First of all, water does its work without attachments. Water is, of course, not a person, doesn't have feelings. It doesn't try to do anything. It is only flowing and being true to its own nature. As this is happening, the magnificence of the Grand Canyon is the side effect. How do we learn from that? Here's what it means. What if you are able to emulate the Tao and therefore water? What if you are able to do your work like water without attachments? What if you are being true to yourself, the best in yourself? You don't try to do anything, you're just following your own true nature, the best in you. If you are able to do that, then I would say the magnificence of your life, it will be a masterpiece that you carve out over time. It will be a side effect. It will be a natural side effect that is unavoidable, that it will definitely happen. And this summarizes so much of the Tao approach in life. Don't try to succeed. Be true to yourself. Success will be a natural byproduct. So that's one of the things that we can learn from water. So that's great. How about air? Can we learn from air as well? What would be an example of air imposing its will on the hardest things of the world? We talk about air as the softest thing. But I think it's reasonable that one may assume that air would not have the same ability as water has to carve out a canyon. You know, there wouldn't be air cutting down rocks to form something like the Grand Canyon, right? Well, in reality, I want to share with everyone, air is more than capable of creating its own stunning works of art, its own masterpieces through wind erosion. I talked about the Grand Canyon National Park. There's actually a national park devoted to the works of wind erosion, as in natural arches. This particular photo is a natural arch that is produced by wind erosion in Jordan. So halfway around the world, but still striking and beautiful examples, sort of like natural sculpture. And speaking of natural sculpture, here's a rock formation from South America, Bolivia specifically, sculpted by wind erosion. And even without going to these works of wonder, I think even just the everyday rustling of the leaves as the wind is blowing through trees, that is a work of art on its own. So bottom line, just like water, air also has mastery over the hardest things of the world, as you can see in these beautiful photos. Now, we also talked about light. So what about that? How about light? Light is even more formless than either water or air, right? So can we carve out canyons with light? Can we sculpt rocks, rock formations and arches, natural arches with light? Well, not really, but we can look at light in a different way. Light can also have its own specific mastery. We've now seen two examples from nature. I want to switch gears and look at technology in modern times, rather than natural marvels crafted over millions of years. And here's what I want to show, switching gears a little bit. What is this? Well, this goes back to something that we probably have all seen and heard from childhood. You know, even as little kids, we know that if we were to use a magnifying glass on insects, that the concentrated light, even though formless, can actually kill. Whereas water and air will take millions of years to sculpt something. Light is very powerful and it can kill within minutes, which of course, hopefully we know about using magnifying glass on insects, but maybe that's something that hopefully you've only heard and not done for yourself. And I am, of course, speaking from experience since I was compassionate as a child. Of course, you may get a different answer from that depending on who you ask. So we don't have to go into that topic right now. Back to this right here. This image is the extreme version of what we're talking about. It's coherent, concentrated light, laser, cutting through metal. Metal is harder than the rocks and stones that we were talking about, sculpted by water and air. Here, it's being cut by light. Amazing when you think about it. Light, we think of that as even more formless than water or air, and yet, when harnessed in this particular way, it can be incredibly destructive. Lastly, we have thoughts. What about harnessing thoughts? Last but not the least, how about thoughts? Thoughts are internal. They're not external like water, air, or light. So how would they have mastery over the hardest things of the world? I mean, you can't use thoughts to carve out canyons or sculpt rocks. You can't use thoughts to cut through metal. Yes, that's correct. But the light example provides us with a clue. Laser coherent light is an invention. It's a product of the mind. It's a product of human ingenuity. The laser is something that started out as a thought in someone's mind. So there's a little bit more to this. Let's review. Remember, thoughts are most Tao-like when they are creative, inventive, innovative, or life-affirming and life-improving. So on the creative and inventive side of it, there's the laser, as we talked about. There's also construction projects like the dam that you see here, which is from France. So remember that water, soft, overcomes rocks, hard. Human ingenuity, thoughts, gives us a measure of control over water, as you see here. So how cool is that? So thoughts, although formless, like the Tao, something we take for granted, something that we all have, is actually something that we can use to help us gain mastery over water. So this is the most important concept because we're not necessarily inventors. We're not involved with engineering. We're not involved with, laser cutters, but we can all benefit from improving ourselves. Specifically, 至坚, the hardest things. Within your mental landscape, these are the bad habits, the patterns, the negative patterns that keep you from living up to your full potential. 至柔, Tao-centered thoughts. They can help you overcome the negative and destructive behavior patterns that are holding you back. So the idea is that we can utilize 至柔 in the mind, and they will help us overcome the hardest things to change about our lives. Now, here is where I want to tell you about Grandmaster Chen. Grandmaster Chen is a remarkable sage, one of the people that I respect the most. You see, there are things that you learn in Tao cultivation, and that includes how to look at the world through the Tao lens in order to see the underlying reality in all things. You come across a lot of people in the course of studying the Tao. Some of them have titles, high-level positions, but these are elements of the material world. When you look through the eyes of the Tao, you'll find that some of them are not too different from your level, possibly even less. But with Grandmaster Chen, it's actually the opposite. He had already attained the highest level in Tao cultivation from the material world perspective. But when I see him through the eyes of the Tao, I see that his attainment, his spiritual attainment, was even higher than his title would suggest. Grandmaster Chen was a living sage, and only a handful of people could be described in that way. Grandmaster Chen passed away at the age of 100. He was active in Tao cultivation right up until the end. He was constantly visiting different temples to provide teachings, share the Tao, share insights. His mind was as sharp as ever, at 90 plus years of age. Amazing. And one thing that everyone could agree on was that Grandmaster Chen did everything in accordance with the teachings that he preached. Zero inconsistency between words and actions. Truly a living sage of the Tao. So his name, Chen Deyang, title, Qian Ren, and we usually called him Chen Qian Ren, which means Grandmaster Chen. So one of the things that he discussed was this very chapter, Daodejing chapter 43. When he talked about it, he would start in a similar way as the other Tao teachers by using water as an example of soft overcoming the hard. Despite being soft and formless, he said, water goes through rocks and everything else. And that's from a material world perspective. So what about the Tao perspective? Chen Qianren would note that the Tao cannot be seen, cannot be touched. But the Tao is everywhere, controls everything. So the myriad things of the world, no matter how strong, how hard, must follow and obey the Tao. Nothing can be without the Tao. Then Chen Qianren continues on to discuss human nature. He would talk about how the most difficult things to change in ourselves will be the bad habits, the flaws, the out-of-control temper, the rage, things that many people would like to change about themselves, but they would always fail to do so. More likely than not, they would fail. Perhaps the most difficult of all was addiction. Here, Chen Qianren would use himself as an example to talk about his life prior to discovering the Tao. Now, this was many decades ago, and he was a much younger man. He had no definite direction in life, and he was definitely addicted to cigarettes and alcohol. He smoked 2 packs of cigarettes a day, and every night he would need to drink half a bottle of whiskey to relax him so he could sleep. That was him back in those days. And he said, those who had never had such addictions have no idea about how difficult it would be to quit, how miserable, how painful it would be to stop. And you and I can see it indirectly by the number of people who try and fail, number of people who are still deep in addiction, in substance abuse. Back then, Chen Qianren had, through an opportunity become a Dao cultivator. So he received the Dao. He started listening to Dao teachings. This went on for about half a year, for about 6 months. And then his mentor in the Dao said to him, well, listen, you've been doing this for 6 months. It's time for you to take it to the next level. You should go through the Ching ritual. The Ching ritual is the vegetarian vow that includes not just stopping consumption of meat, but also ending your addictions like cigarettes and alcohol. So he decided, okay, sure, I'll do it. It's time. And after going through the Ching ritual, he realized his smoking and drinking days were coming to an end. But that was easier said than done. He decided to go into it cold turkey. He immediately started suffering the withdrawal symptoms. Without cigarettes, he said, he felt constantly weak and tired during that initial time frame. So he ended up using chewing gum to help him get through the day. He talked about this. He also talked about how without alcohol, he could not fall asleep. He needed something to relax him. He actually spent an entire week without adequate sleep, just could not fall asleep. He was too tense. And that was yet another level of suffering. There were many times he felt he just couldn't do it, ready to give up. And if it was only himself trying to do it on his own, he would definitely have failed. Fortunately, he had the Tao. He used the 3 treasures to steady his mind. His thoughts centered around the Tao to give him strength. And after the first week of pure hell, things started to get a little bit easier. It was still very difficult from time to time, but he felt increasingly confident that he could handle the lure of addiction and, more importantly, all the excuses that he could have given himself. As he continued down this path, he saw other people like himself who were also deep, mired in material desires. And these desires had a poisonous effect on their lives, and now he could see that. But if they kept on the path of cultivation, they could also use the Tao to dissolve the poison, to render the poisons harmless and powerless over them. So, 陈前人 said, from a life perspective, the hardest things include not just such elements as cigarettes and alcohol, but also addictions to desires. Life is full of negativity, setbacks, failures, defeats, depressions, misery, hopelessness, you name it. He said, that 8 or 9 times out of 10, things just don't pan out the way that you hoped. Life events can drive you nuts. They can frustrate you to the edge of your tolerance. All of these things are 至坚, the hardest things in life. Think about the people who are suicidal. They experience so much pain. They just want to end it all. There's nothing harder than that. And nothing can solve it for them except the Tao. 至柔, the softest of all. So, 陈前人 said, using the Tao is how we must live. Using your true nature, your conscience, the best element in you, your highest self, to solve your toughest problems. Problems within yourself, problems dealing with other people, the Tao will work for all of that. Don't try to fight fire with fire. You just create a greater fire. Don't try to use force against force. You end up hurting yourself. Now that you have encountered the Tao, it's time to put it to use. You can take care of the issues in life with compassion understanding, gratitude, and humility, you can face all of those challenges. Use the softest to overcome the hardest. So why did Chen Qianren talk about his own life experience in discussing this chapter, Daodejing 43? Well, it was because his practice of the Tao focused on application in everyday living. It wasn't enough for him to talk about water going through rocks. He wanted to expand on that into using the Tao to go through and get rid of bad habits and negative patterns. That is the practical application of the soft overcoming the hard. I find a lot of inspiration in the words of Chen Qianren, and I hope you do as well. Now it's time to get to the summary for today. We've gone over a little bit, but I hope that you will see that it's worthwhile, as I wanted to get through and complete the story, complete the circle by talking about Chen Qianren. So the theme today, the soft overcomes the hard. There are two elements here in the summary. One is external, one is internal. Starting with the external, observe the world, notice examples of the soft approach. At the national level, notice how diplomacy, instead of armed conflict, can accomplish national objectives. Such a better way. In a similar fashion, reconciliation instead of contention, instead of aggression, can bring about lasting peace between yourself and your friends, your neighbors, your co-workers, between yourself and other people. So that's the external, it's the observation. Then the internal is to turn your gaze inward, apply the soft approach internally. That means, first, connect with the thoughts within that you can be more and do better. Exactly as Chen Qianren did when he first decided to go cold turkey on cigarettes and alcohol. He could do better, he could be more. And he was right. Then you must accept the situation as it is. No blaming yourself, no regrets about the past. What's done is done. You must move on and create a better tomorrow. Lastly, don't get mad at the internal issue. Rather, do as Chen Qianren did. Apply the Tao gently but firmly. Lastly, remember his words. 以柔来克服天下之至坚. Use the soft to overcome the hardest things in the world. And what he talked about specifically, hardest things in your life. So these are the words of Grandmaster Chen. I would like to leave you with that as we wrap our meeting for today. Our meeting has come to an end, but the journey continues on. Let us travel safely. Until next time, may the Tao fill you with peace and happiness.